love to hear for you to put in the chat box what your role is. If not, that's great too. I know you guys are probably on your lunch break and just kind of grabbing this while you can. So my name is Tara, and I'm an occupational therapist. I've been working as an OT for over 20 years. And based on experiences that I've had, I've found that my specialty, kind of my area of expertise, is working with children, but specifically children who are having some challenging behaviors. And so I do a lot of work with schools and with families on just helping teams to better understand those behaviors and thinking about what we can do to prevent those behaviors, and then what we can do, how we can better respond or not respond to those behaviors. And so that's kind of where I've spent most of my time on is working with children with challenging behaviors. And so I'm going to make sure we can get in. There we go. So we're going to do a quick 1 hour course. This one is assumptions about behaviors. And so I want to kind of put this out. This is really what drives my philosophies around supporting children with challenging behaviors, are these assumptions. And so the first assumption is that behavior is communication. And so I truly believe that even if kids are very verbal, they still have difficulty expressing or with some skills related to communicating what they need, what they don't need. So behavior is most of the time about communication. The state of being dictates behavior. So I love this. I saw this. It says the outward manifestation, behavior is the outward manifestation of a person's internal body processes, perceptions, emotions, thought, and intentions. So it's just that what we see based on what's going on most of the time internally. So I thought that was a nice definition of really what behavior is. And better relations equal better behavior. So one thing I've really been putting a lot in my trainings is about behavior. To help behavior, we really have to connect with kids. And we have to know that when kids feel connected and they have those stronger relationships, the better their behavior usually is. Self-regulation takes two people. So there's this thought of co-regulation. And so we're going to hit on that in a little bit later when we're looking more at the behavior escalation curve, about thinking about, instead of self-regulation, instead of just thinking the kids need to learn how to do it themselves, I need to think about how can I help with co-regulation? How can I be an accommodation for the student who doesn't know how to de-escalate, who doesn't know what to do when their feelings and their emotions escalate? So thinking more along those lines of co-regulation. And like I said, we'll hit on that here in a little bit. The other thing is 95% of the time should be dedicated to replacement skills and prevention. And so, we're going to talk about this behavior escalation curve. However, if your student or child that you're with is having these significant curves all the time, then we really need to take a step back and look at how can we change things and modify the environment or the connection to help prevent more of these escalation behaviors from happening. So, and I'm going to give you some strategies on that. This kind of goes back to thinking about just that definition of behavior. So thinking that what we see with children or anybody with behaviors is just the tip of the iceberg. And really what we need to focus on is what is happening underneath. So, we see just this behavior as far as we see that maybe the hitting, the biting, the whatever it might be. But really what is going on underneath that is, the student might not be able to communicate. They might not have, they might be feeling angry or sad, or their sensory systems might be all over the place. There could be all these things going on, but all we're seeing is that tip of the iceberg. And so I think from my perspective, it's so easy for people to get consumed, I guess you could say, with the tip of the iceberg. So it's like, Tara, but you don't understand, like, their behavior, it's horrible. Like they're hitting it so hard. I'm like, I know I don't want to downplay that at all, but I also want to think about the why, like what is happening underneath this behavior that we can address. It's kind of that why of behavior. What are they trying to tell us with that behavior? And that's what should drive our interventions. So there's the iceberg. I don't know if any of you guys have seen this before or not, but I think it's a great demonstration of, it's a great visual about behavior. And so I like to share this with teams to use to work with other team members to help better understand behaviors. Here's another visual that I love. And this comes from conscious discipline. So I don't know if any of you guys are familiar with conscious discipline. It's something that of course, I took a couple years ago and I just fell in love with it. And it kind of helped me think about behavior a little bit differently. I'll be honest, I used to think about behavior from strictly a behavioral perspective. Well, I'm learning by reading and learning and listening to people and thinking about what works and what doesn't, is that there's a lot more to it than just a behavioral response. It's really about the connection and the environment and all these things. And so this visual is, like I said, it's from conscious discipline. And it kind of, after I heard about this, it kind of drove how I changed my trainings a little bit and how I changed my approaches, honestly. And so thinking about, and I like this because it goes back to the brain. So it goes back to science, and that makes sense to me. And so if you look at this, it looks at how different parts of the brain respond and how behavior might look based on where their brain is functioning at the time. Okay, what area is functioning the most at the time. And so thinking about when students are in survival state, when children are in survival state, okay, you can see on there that they're in that, that brainstem area. And survival state is when you have children who are in fight or flight mode, fight, flight, or freeze, okay, to where they are maybe just numb. They don't even know what to do. Okay, that is survival state. And when children are in that state, they're really asking themselves, their brain is saying, am I safe here? Okay. And the reason I hit on this in the beginning is that for our children to really learn, we have to remember that we can't, when children are in fight or flight mode, that's not a time we're teaching new skills. Okay. It is really trying to help them feel safe where they're at. Okay. And I'm going to hit on that here in just a second. So then we've got the next stage, which is that attachment, that connection state. Okay. So this is where, they are asking, so they might feel safe in their environment, but maybe they're not feeling connected. Okay. So you might get some more of that back talk. You might get some more of that. They're not having those extreme fight or flight behaviors, but they're kind of being more sassy, more talk back, not quite doing what they're, more of those battles they're fighting with you. Their brain might be asking, am I connected? Do I feel connection here? Okay. So if you then have a child who feels safe in their environment and feel connected, that's when they can be in that self-regulation state, in that state of their brain where they're able to process and learn those new skills. And so once again, I say this because I see it so often that I'll go and work with a classroom and child is in fight or flight mode, and we're trying to teach them how to ask for help, or we're trying to teach them how to take turns or an academic activity. So I have to tell teachers, I'm like, okay, you got to back off. If they're not in the right brain state, you're not going to get anything out of this except frustration. And so we need to start making them feel safe. We need to feel connected before we're ever going to get to the academics. Okay. And you'll get a lot farther in the academics if we make sure these other things are happening. Would you mind, some of you guys in the chat box, have you guys seen this before? Or what are some of your thoughts on this visual? Do you love it as much as I do? Because I think it's awesome. Based on this visual, this is where I've kind of started to revamp some of my trainings to where I start off with this process Okay, Sharon said, I like the visual. I work with a child who's, yes. And I'm going to hit on that, Sharon, because I've had several kids lately where they are in survival all the time. And so we'll hit on that definitely. And so this is kind of where that process came from is, you know, how can we look at safe physical environment, a safe social environment, and then how can we focus on teaching those skills to support advocacy and engagement? And so thinking that our goal needs to be is how can we make sure that we're focusing on ways for students to communicate their needs? Okay, because when they can communicate their needs, they can advocate for themselves. Okay, so these are just some tips I'm going to go through. I know you guys mostly are here about the behavior escalation curve. And so I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time on these, but I just wanted to, I felt like it's just my responsibility to make sure that I'm emphasizing these too. And so thinking about if when you have students that are in that fight or flight type mode, asking yourself, do they feel safe in this environment? And safety in an environment is not just about getting hurt, right? It's about feeling like you belong in that environment. So thinking that, are there, you know, I think about when I feel safe at work or in an environment, these are also the things that go through my mind, right? I want to know, are there clear expectations? Do I know what I'm supposed to do today? Do I know what I'm supposed to do when I go in this environment? So thinking about that for the students and the children you're with, do they have clear expectations for those environments? What is the physical environment like? Is it organized where they know where they're supposed to be, what they're supposed to do? Do they know how to access things that they like? Are there predictable routines? Okay, so how can, if we're having a lot of those behaviors around transition times or around routines, do we need to reteach some of those routines? Because when children feel, I read this a couple of weeks ago, and I thought this was really good insight, is when children have good routines in their classroom, they feel like they belong and they feel like they're a part of something bigger. And I'm like, oh, that's really good, because it's true. Like, right, when you see kids that are all on the same page and they are busting through with their routines, they feel like they belong. And so those routines can be so critical for children to help them feel safe. And then those transition supports. So thinking that, you know, do we have a way to help with those transitions? Are there clear routines for transitions? Do they know what's coming up? Do they need a little more motivation for their transitions? How can we make them feel safe with those? The other thing is the sensory supports. Okay, so looking at, you know, are there a place for the child to take a break? Do they have somewhere to go when they get overwhelmed? Do they have things that help them feel calm? Okay, is the environment too chaotic? Like, do we need a little bit more structure in the classroom, more physical boundaries in the classroom? Because that might be making them feel not very safe. And then the visual supports. Okay, and this is one I hit on a lot, because with visual supports, when I get upset, I'm sure most of you guys are like that too. Whenever you get upset, you don't hear everything that's going on, right? You just hear blah, 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 blah. Well, thinking about that too for your students and the children, that the more we talk, and we're going to hit on this in a little bit, the more that behavior escalates. So when we can see something written in a visual format, that it shows me what's coming up, what's happening, what my expectations are, it stays the same. That helps me feel safe in my physical environment. Okay. So if you're a parent, if you are a teacher or a therapist or all the above, thinking about is there any changes that we might need to make to that physical environment to help them feel safe. Another thing I didn't put on here that is really important too is, are there things in that physical environment that are meaningful to them? And I say this because I was on a consult last year, and I went, they're like, okay, you got to come help me with this student because he's fight or flight. Like, he's coming in the classroom and he's taking off running. So I said, okay, watched him, saw the student go in the classroom, and the classroom was chaos, right? I was like, I didn't even know where he was supposed to sit, what he was supposed to do. There wasn't really anything there that he enjoyed, that he liked. And so guess what? He went in there, he stayed for a couple minutes, and then he bolted down to the PE room. and he just kind of laid there because that's where he felt safe. And so I said, okay, right now we can't be teaching him turn to all these high level skills because right now he doesn't feel safe in here. We need to create a safe space for him. We need to create clear expectations. We need to give him access to things that he likes. Okay. So the next part then is that safe social environment. So thinking about that connection. Okay. I've really been emphasizing this a lot in my trainings, is that how can we feel connected with children? And I think it's really hard to do, especially for children with a lot of challenging behavior, or children who might not have as much verbal skills as others, or social skills. It can be really tricky to really have that connection. But it's really on us. Like as adults, we're the ones that need to put ourselves out there to find ways to connect with children who might connect differently. And so thinking about making sure we're taking a strength-based approach, that we're looking at what are their positives, what are their strengths, what do they enjoy, and creating plans around that. Also thinking about building an emotional piggy bank. And so thinking that when children, I like to use this visual of a piggy bank. So thinking that we all have these emotional piggy banks, different sizes, whatever. When my piggy bank is full, that means I've felt success. I have good friends that I can call, or I've had a good day at work. I've had a good day with my kids. Those things build my emotional piggy bank. Okay. When things don't go my way, or I mess up or whatever, my bank account runs low. Okay. So thinking that when you have kids that come into your school, or you see them and their piggy bank looks like it's in the negative, the only way to help them fill that emotional piggy bank is by more deposits. Okay. So I tell schools this all the time. If they're coming into school and you can tell that they've had a rough morning, don't keep withdrawing from them, right? We have to put more deposits into their emotional piggy bank. So I love that visual. I also like the 5-to-1 principle. And so this is thinking about that, and there's a lot of research behind this, that and not just in working with children, but just in working with in relationships in the business industry, that to have those solid relationships, we have to have 5 times more positive interactions or non-contingent to 1 corrective. Okay, so if I'm correcting a student a lot, and I'm not saying you shouldn't correct kids, I'm saying that if you're doing that, we need to think about 5 times more interactions that are either positive or non-contingent. I might just be given a high five. I might just be asking them how their weekend was. I don't have to be just telling them that how good they're doing all the time. I'm just interacting with them to interact with them, not to correct them or put an expectation on them. Okay, so that 5-to-1 is a good strategy. Another good strategy for that connection is this 2-by-10 strategy. Okay, and so some of you guys, you might be able to do this, some it might be hard, but you might be a strategy you share with some teachers, is 2 minutes a day for 10 days straight of just being with the child. Okay, you're not putting expectations on them. You're not correcting them. You are just being with them. You might be talking about them, what they did for the weekend. I've had teachers tell me that in the beginning, for some kids, they didn't want it. So they would be like, I don't want to do that, but they stayed consistent with it. And over time, the students started really enjoying it. So it really helped that connection piece. Positive reinforcement is another one. And so, I hit on this a lot, but making sure that we are catching kids being good and we are reinforcing for them. We're motivating them by things that they enjoy. Okay. So how can we use that positive reinforcement? And then peer support. This last school year, I do a lot of consults in the school. So if we have a school here, I'm in Oklahoma, and they are having a child with some challenging behaviors, they'll bring us in and we'll do a consult. And so this last year, I've really been stressing the peer mediated strategies. And it's been so amazing is that, I was on a consult a couple of weeks ago, and there was a child with autism they were trying to get in circle time. And so I said, and the child had a para with her, and she had the teacher and then students around. And I told the pair, I said, I want you to change your mindset now. And instead of giving your instructions to the child with autism, I want you to give your instruction to the peer. So think about all your instruction goes to the peer. So when this little girl would get up and run around or start kind of fidgeting, the peer would just kind of reach over and say, it's okay. Look at what's on the board. And so we gave that peer a lot of tools to help that child. And it was amazing how much better the child responded. And then we rotated the peers, and the peers, I feel like most peers want to help, and they want to be with the kids. They just don't know what to do. And so I've been doing a lot of that lately, and I've just been loving it. Really looking at that peer mediated support. Okay. And this last thing is this, before we jump into the more specifics on the behavior escalation curve, is how thinking about those skills that we need to teach. And so, when you see a child that's having a lot of challenging behaviors, is thinking, what is that skill that they're not able to do? And what is that positive opposite? So I spent some time this week with a student with pretty significant behaviors, and it was, okay, anytime he didn't want to do something, he was like throwing it or running away, or sometimes he would come after you. So really what we needed to teach him was how to refuse something, because he didn't have the skill to tell us he didn't want to do it. So instead he would have his behavior. So thinking about what is that positive opposite for that behavior. And these are some questions to think about. Can they get their wants and needs met? Can they self-manage? How are they interacting with other people? Can they participate in community activities? And if your child's having trouble with these, then most likely they are having some challenging behaviors. And so thinking about what are the positive opposite to those skills. And here's some just different strategies that I've used for teaching. And I stress with teachers and parents on errorless teaching. So thinking about, I want to help the child get whatever skill I'm teaching it right from the beginning, and then fade my help versus correcting them over and over again. Because I found that, like, when I'm correcting kids, especially kids with challenging behavior, the more I do that, the more they escalate. Okay. And that's just that trigger that starts that escalation cycle. I do a lot of forward and backward chaining, where I'll break skills down into small steps, and we'll teach small steps at a time. Behavior momentum is another one. So if you're having a lot of behavior escalation around academics, you could use behavior momentum, where I'm going to start working with the child with something easy so I can get them engaged. I would slowly make that skill a little bit harder. But before I want to end on a good note. So before they escalate, because what I see happen a lot is we push to failure. So we push them until they have the behaviors, and then we pull back on the support. Then we take off, and then we stop doing this skill. Versus I want to push them, but I want to come back to easy. So that way we're ending where the child feels successful, and they feel good, and I feel good, and that makes the child want to come back and work with me again. So that behavior momentum, it can be a really good tool. Naturalistic teaching, so finding opportunities to work on those skills and natural opportunities. I was doing this not too long ago with a student very verbal student, but didn't know how to ask for help. So what he did is he would either just sit there and start to escalate until then he would finally tear up the worksheet, or that's what he would do. And so I said, let's, in the moment, as we're starting to see him, we're going to give him the worksheet. And as he's looking at it, and we can tell that he's not going to know how to do this on his own, I'm going to bring the help card in. I'm going to point to it, and I'm going to say, you can point to this if you need help. He points to it, and I immediately give him help. This was a student who's very verbal, but when in the moment, he didn't know how to ask for help. So we had to teach him naturally, this is how you ask for help. And then once again, how can you set up some of those social opportunities to practice some of these skills? Can you do some play groups in the home? Can you do some reverse inclusion for some students? Okay, maybe they're spending most of the time in the special education classroom. Can we bring some peers down? Can we bring them to the general ed classroom? How can we get peers involved? How can we look at some extracurricular type activities? So those are some things just to think about. I could talk about these things all day long. but you're here for support. You're here to learn about the behavior escalation curve. So let's jump into it. And I've also been doing a lot of thinking and processing on this behavior escalation cycle, because I feel like it can really make or break. And it anyway, I'll kind of walk you through this. I love this quote. It takes a calm brain to regulate another brain. So as we're going through this, is thinking that if we're not calm, then the student's not going to be calm, or the child's not going to be calm. And so I feel, though, that the more prepared you are and the better you understand this behavior, the more calm you can be. I see people, I see adults escalating when they don't know what to do, right? Whenever they're like starting to nervous and you're starting, okay, are they going to run away? Are they going to throw something? Are they, and they don't know how to respond. That's when I see behaviors in adults escalate. So I think the more prepared you are, the more you know what to do and how to handle that, I feel like the less the adults escalate. And so really it's this process of co-regulation that I want you to think about as we're going through this cycle. And I was, reading or watching this training on conscious discipline, and that's where they started talking about co-regulation. And I thought, this is so spot on, because they said, okay, think of a time, because most of our, I mean, I'm an OT, so a lot of goals and a lot of things we do is about self-regulation, right? And so they said, well, when was the last time that you truly self-regulated? And we do sometimes, but most of the time, and we're all somewhat neurotypical adults, right? Most of the time we're relying on somebody else to help in some form or fashion. Like if I'm upset at work, I'll call my business partner, right? That's co-regulation. If I'm upset with my kids, then I might yell at my husband, whatever. Okay, that's co-regulation. So thinking about, and that kind of just made me think differently. I'm like, but then why are we expecting children always to learn how to self-regulate? Instead, I want us to think about us co-regulating and think about us being an accommodation for them. Okay, instead of trying to gain control over their behavior when it's escalating, how can we help support? Okay, how can we be an accommodation? And so I like this co-regulation. The other thing that was really interesting to me was how much self-regulation, how much co-regulation is needed. And if you look at this, that the times that that children need the most co-regulation is in those toddler preschool years, right? And then in those teenage adolescent years. Okay. And that makes sense, right? That's when everybody's like, oh my gosh, my teenagers, or oh my gosh, my toddlers. But that's when there's so many different, they're learning, there's so many different hormones going on in their brains, that is when we are even more critical to support them through co-regulation. And I think about this too, like I have two teenagers, and I think, before I read this, I was like, well, she should know better by now. She's 14, right? She should know that she can't have a full-on meltdown. And then when I read this, I was like, okay, well, maybe she does need more of my support like she did when she was younger, because just of the stage of life that she's in. And so anyway, I thought this was interesting too, to kind of give ourselves a little bit of grace, like to where it's okay to support during this time versus feeling like we just need to stop the behavior and gain control over the behavior. Okay, so here is our behavior and the escalation cycle. And what I'm going to do here in just a second is I'm going to switch over and show you a Word document that I created that helps these stages, help to understand these stages a little bit more. So I have on the Padlet, I put a Word or a Word PDF document of this that I'm going to go ahead and switch over so that way I can walk you through this. Okay, so let me pull that up. And if you have any questions as I'm going, feel free, please, to put it in the chat box. Let me share my screen here. Okay. So hopefully you can see this now. Okay, so the first stage is this calm stage. And when students or children are in this calm, they're cooperative, they're on task, they can accept corrections, okay? They can follow rules, expectations, they can ignore some distractions, they can accept praise, they have those socially appropriate behaviors. I didn't think this stage was important until recently. And I think this is where Sharon had brought up, is that for some kids, your goal might be in the beginning to get them to a stage 1. And I have several kids I've worked with recently, and they're older, they're teens, if not older, to where they wake up or they arrive to school already at a stage 3 or a stage 4. Okay. And so for those situations, going back to that brain science that we talked about earlier, is I know I cannot get academics, I cannot put expectations on them if they are not at a stage 1. Okay. So not thinking that they're just getting their way and they're able to get away with whatever. Thinking about the brain is I have to get their brain, I have to get their internal processes and feelings to a stage 1 calm. Okay. If I do and I keep putting expectations to them and they're at a stage 3 or a stage 4, good luck, right? You're already going to be at that stage 5 within the first 30 minutes of school or the first 30 minutes of their day. Okay. And by doing that, to get them to that stage 1, it's, thinking, and I'll go through some examples here in a minute, but they're coming in at stage 3. We're going to have to work first to get them to stage 1. Because it's not like all kids just start off at 1, 2, 3, 4. They might start off at 3 or 4, but our goal is to get them back down to 1. Okay, so knowing what does the child look like at 1? How do I know when they're calm and happy and at stage 1? Okay, and that's what I found about this curve or this cycle, that is the most important thing, is to really fine tune your observation skills. And take note of every little sign that you're seeing of escalation or de-escalation. Start writing them down. If you're the one spending a lot of time with that child, write those down. Because so often we don't see those signs until they're up here at a 4 or 5. Okay, so really starting to take note of those subtle things that indicate that student is escalating. Okay, so number 1, we're starting off, what is their stage 1? So let's say we've got a kid who comes in and they're happy, they're at a stage 1. What then happens is these triggers happen. And think about triggers are things that are going on around the student. It might be one thing, but most of the time it's an accumulation of things, right? And that's where I see it happening a lot, where it's like, it just came out of nowhere. Okay, it's probably all these little triggers that were going on that we didn't even realize maybe were happening. Okay, they weren't things that we were intentionally setting up as triggers, right? It was just things that were happening. So it might be we told them no, they couldn't have something. It might be that there was some kind of change in their routine. Might be they didn't have much sleep last night. It might mean there was some interruptions, that maybe there was a lot of failures or low rates of positive reinforcement. Maybe somebody was teasing them at school or whatever it might be. But thinking about these triggers, okay? Because you might not see these triggers happening until you take a step back and really start paying attention. Okay, because those triggers can then lead to this stage 3 of agitation. And when you start seeing, this is where your good observation skills need to kick in. What are those first signs of agitation? Is it maybe their eyes dart, their language is maybe not quite on conversation. Their hands are busy, maybe not doing what the task is. I see a lot of kids start off this agitation with wandering. So in stage 1, they're able to sit and work, but when they start kind of wandering around aimlessly, I see that being an initial trigger to that agitation stage, or a sign that they're in that agitation stage. They might be off task, talking with others. And so what are those first signs? I had a student I worked with who his first sign of agitation was he would put his head in his hoodie. Okay. We didn't notice that at first until we started really breaking it down. We're like, oh my gosh, that means he's up, he's agitated. We need to do something different. So the thing I stress about this is that when you see those first signs of agitation, you have to change what you're doing. Okay. I mean, you don't have to. You can keep doing the same thing, but you're going to keep going. They're going to keep escalating. Okay. So once again, remind yourself and your team that you are an accommodation. That, self-control and escalation are inversely related. When a student has self-control, they're not escalating. When they're escalating, they don't have a lot of self-control. They can't help it most of the time. So thinking that when you're at that stage, when they're at that stage 3 agitation, focus on reducing anxiety, back off, structure some environmental modifications, maybe give them some space. Provide some reasonable options and choices. So maybe give them a different assignment, modify it a little bit, give them ask them if they need a break. Focus on that reducing anxiety, maybe kind of switch to work break routine where I'm going to give them access to some more preferred activities, maybe more independent activities. I found that the more, if I'm working with a student who's starting to escalate, I'll switch to something they can do by themselves. And that sometimes helps de-escalate. Movement activities. So some kind of redirection where, okay, take this down the hallway, or let's go jump on the trampoline for 20 times. Some kind of movement activity can be enough to help students de-escalate. Okay. So this is that stage 3. Caution, if not addressed, the student may escalate or remain distracted. Okay, so this next stage, then, if we don't change what we're doing, we keep going, then we might get to this stage of acceleration. Okay, so this is when those behavior are more intense, threatening, maybe that's physical, verbal attacks. At this point, the interventions focus on safety. Okay, at this point too, escalation is most likely to run its course. Okay, which is why I stress that we really have to look at what to do during that agitation stage. Okay, if not, once we get here, most of the time it's hard to stop without them further moving on to that next stage. Okay, there's some things to avoid on here. I'm going to go into in depth a little bit more of this on the PowerPoint. But then that stage 5 is the peak. So they're out of control, all the highest behaviors. And so it's focused on safety. Think about legal requirements, move slowly, speak calmly. The biggest thing here is to not communicate that urgency to gain control. Okay, limit your talking, limit the interactions. I'm going to hit on this back on the PowerPoint, but that it's so hard because when they do, you want to just like stop it, right? You're like, I can't do this, but you're going to have to let some of that go and think, right, at this point, I just need to wait them out a little bit. Okay, the more I try to control it, the longer it's going to last. The other part here that's really important is this de-escalation stage. So I feel like thinking about the 2 important stages are that agitation. What are those subtle signs? And then this de-escalation. Okay. I see a lot of times we see them lighten up their behavior a little bit. And so we just go back to doing the same thing. And then they go back up there again. We need to make sure that this stage 6, that we're giving them enough time to really de-escalate. Okay. So when they start to see it, you might see them letting up just a little bit. They might be still denying it, blaming others, but you're getting a little bit more interaction from them. They might be not running, moving around as much. Their body's a little bit calmer, and moving to more easy, concrete tasks versus going back and presenting them with the same task that maybe was part of that, those triggers. And then that stage 7 is that recovery. So that's when they can, they might be a little bit more subdued in group work, but they're able to kind of go back to some of their routines and some of their activities. And you're really focusing on helping them get back to those normal routines. You might have to increase the rate of positive reinforcement and debrief with the team. And I'll talk about that here in a minute. And so this right here, I would highly suggest that if you're working on a team, that you go through this as a team together to start writing down what are those subtle signs that you're seeing throughout this process. Okay. If as I said earlier, if you have a student that you're working with that comes in at that stage 3 or stage 4, you have to start here. So you are going back to focus on reducing anxiety. So how can I back off? How can I give them some more space? How can I give them maybe activity to some calming things, right? Because if I just go with the same expectations as everybody else, that student is going to accelerate. Okay. So, but it's just going to start when they first get to school your first interaction with them, if they're already starting off at that 3 or 4. Okay. I'm going to go back to the PowerPoint here because I have some do's and don'ts of this escalation cycle. And like I said, if you have any questions, please post it in the chat box. Okay. So here are some do's and don'ts for this behavior escalation. An adult response can serve to either escalate or de-escalate the situation. So based on how you respond can either help or hurt the situation. So here are some do's that I came across, and I thought these were really good. I put the website on here. It's also on the Padlet. There's a great handout on this that I thought these are spot on. So limit the number of individuals. Okay. If you have individuals there for safety, that's great, but have the more limited numbers the better. The adult with the best relationship should be communicating and providing support. Okay. If that adult is the one that they're going after all the time, then that probably shouldn't be the adult taking the lead during this escalation cycle. Okay. Assign one person who seems to be the most calming for that child. And the more upset the student, the calmer the adult needs to be. And I thought this was spot on, is like, yes, absolutely. So thinking about if they're escalating, how can I be even more calm to model that for that child? And model through your breath, nonverbal expression. So watching all that, because kids with challenging behavior can be very, they notice a lot of things that we don't even realize. So how am I presenting myself through my breath, my expressions, my self-talk, all those calming strategies? Am I modeling that? Wait for another time to discuss the behavior. Okay. If you do it during this time, it's just going to escalate. Okay. Wait if it would even help the situation. Okay. Talk about it tomorrow or next week, but in the moment, it's not going to help you help that student de-escalate. Pre-teach how to self-monitor and strategies for alleviating tension. So if that child doesn't know how to proficiently use those skills, then don't use them during this time. You want to make sure that they have those relaxation and all those really good before we even try to get them during this time. This time is not a time to teach. The time to teach is when they're calm. Okay. So that way they can use those skills when they are when their behavior is starting to escalate. Know what's written on that behavior plan. If you have a behavior plan written, what is on there? Some other things, pause and engage in active listening. So you're validating their feelings. And I thought this was interesting. And I know sometimes we have trouble with this, is that validating their feelings does not mean you validate their behavior. Okay. you can validate that they're upset and that they're frustrated without saying you approve of the hitting or the screaming or whatever the behaviors. So I thought that makes sense, you know? And so we're validating those feelings. We're ignoring any challenging questions and focusing on working with that child on a calm solution. So trying not to get into those power struggles during that time, using that calm, clear, respectful, and non-emotional tone of voice. Okay, so really try to be calm for them. Like the more they are, the more calm we have to be. Use a non-confrontational stance. So where your arms at your side, you have a relaxed body, your facial expressions are neutral. Like once again, they're going to be paying attention to those subtle cues that you're giving. Honor their personal space. The more we try to get in their personal space, the more they're going to escalate or continue. Use body, you know, just look at your body language once again. Engage in self-care for you. Okay, a team that I was working with, you know, the last week or two they're stressed and they're worn out. They've done a good job at giving each other breaks and little just surprises once in a while, like a lunch or something. Make sure that we're, you know, if you're in a leadership position, how are we making sure that people that are on the front line are getting taken care of and taking breaks, and you guys are also taking care of yourselves? And the don'ts, I thought these were some good tips, is assume that they understand the meaning of words, nonverbal language, tone, proximity, the same as others. You might be thinking that you're giving these vibes like they should know I'm doing this, I'm crossing my arms, I'm da da da. They know I'm frustrated. They probably aren't interpreting that the same as other kids at that time. Okay, they might not have any idea that you're giving off these vibes, right? So just making sure that, especially in the early stages of this escalation, that we're being very clear with, you know, what's happening, because they might not be interpreting that. I mean, I've also seen, you know, teams are like, so frustrating because they do all this and they smile at me. Like, that doesn't mean they're happy. That means that they have that, maybe they feel like they're just out of control. They don't know what they're supposed to do. And that just gives them this sensation. But don't interpret their emotions either, as far as just because they're smiling doesn't mean they're happy about what's happening. Don't overwhelm them with conversations, additional sensory stimulation, or people. Okay, be careful on everything else that's going around. That can be overwhelming for them. Don't create power struggles. Don't threaten consequences or punishment. Once again, if they had control, they would be doing it. But if the more we try to threaten, like, I'm going to call your mom, you're going to lose, the worse, that longer that behavior is going to happen. Don't try not to deviate from the behavior plan. That consistency can help if you have a good behavior plan. If you don't, it might be time to rewrite that behavior plan. Try not to argue, interrupt, make threats, or set demands that they're unlikely to meet. Okay, if you're threatening or setting this demand that you know they can't meet, like, you need to calm down. That might be something they can't do right now. The more we do that, the longer that cycle is going to last. Don't make statements or judgments about them, like you're disruptive, or these generalizations, like you always get angry when this happens. Use sarcasm, invade their personal space. Don't use physical restraint or seclusion unless it's part of their behavior plan. Once again, look at your body language. And then looking at debriefing. So what were some triggers that happened? Are there triggers that we didn't realize were going on that started accumulating? You know, and what are those subtle signs? What are those first signs of agitation? Did we miss them? Because if so, we need to make sure everybody's trained on what those look like and what to do when that happens. How can we change our responses to the behaviors? Do we need more staff training to help understand what to do during that? This can be hard because, you know, if everybody's coming at it differently, then it's only going to be confusing for that student, and more behavior is going to happen. What skills maybe are they missing? Okay, so one of the students I was working with, he doesn't know how to relax. Okay, he's always wound up like this. So the skill that we're working with him on is how to relax on the couch, how to relax in the chair. Okay, we're going to sit here and we're going to take some deep breaths, and we're going to maybe do some different exercises, or we're going to look at something, a book or something, but we're going to start by teaching him just how to relax. And because that's a skill he doesn't know how to do because he's always walking around at a 3. And then looking at 2, like, is there a behavior plan in place that we maybe need to change or modify because we've been doing that and it's not working? Then let's look at getting the team together and changing that plan. Okay, I have a couple, we've got about 7 minutes left. I have a couple kids I was going to kind of go through, but I want to open it up to any questions first, if you guys have any. You can post it in the chat box, or you can just take your mic, turn your mic on and ask any questions. I'll keep going through my case studies, and feel free to post questions in there if you'd like. Here's one girl named Piper who she was getting having a really hard time in class and at home. And she would get stressed and just kind of either take off out of the classroom or go hide under her desk or whatever. And so with her, we found that she needed a way to tell us how she's feeling, and she needed those skills on how to communicate her needs. And so for her, what we did is we did like a check-in system with a 5-point scale. And so it was a 1 was she was really happy, and a 5 was she was really frustrated. And we created this scale that she could use with her parents and her teachers, to where when she said she was at a 3, they knew she needed a break, right? And a break meant she could go to this area and she could do some different relaxation activities, or she could walk down the hallway, she could go to the office, but she needed a break from the situation. And so we also made sure that, you know, in the beginning, it was, she was asking for a break quite a bit. And so we then are like, well, I don't think she needs it as often as she is. She might be kind of working us over a little bit. So then we said, okay, you get so many break cards for the day, you know, you get 5. And then when we could tell when she really needed those break cards. And then we could look at, okay, she's using them a lot during math. So maybe math needs to be modified a little bit more than what it has, because that subject is really stressing her out a lot. So that was for Piper. So that 5-point scale helped out a lot for her. And then another 2 guys that I've worked with, I had one who, Josiah, where he would come in kind of like I was talking about earlier. He would come in just already amped up. And so I really had to work with the team on, when he comes in there, we don't talk to him. And that sounds so weird. And I'm not saying that in a negative way. I'm saying he can't deal with all the talk. Because for some kids, talking to them feels like you're putting an expectation on them. Okay. It might, and so even if you're talking good things, or you're talking, that might just be too much for them. So we said, when he comes in, let's put some different white noise background music on, some relaxation. Let's give him time to chill, give him access to just some things that he likes. It's more hands-on. And then we can kind of go from there, and then gradually start putting in place the expectations. But we have to pay really close attention to his subtle signs of agitation. When he starts having that, we're then going to teach him, okay, you can ask for a break, and then we're going to take you back to a break, and we're going to get you back regulated again. Okay, because if we kept pushing him as they were, he kept escalating all the time. Okay, so we had to pay really attention to those subtle signs. Another one was this Marcus, who he was in the general ed classroom, and he was doing pretty good with his academics, which was hard because everybody then thought, well, he should be doing this for everything, right? And so he would, he was the one who would put his head into his hoodie, and then he would either start throwing his stuff, or he would bolt out of the classroom. And so we said, for him, first of all, we need to look at, when is he putting his head in his hoodie? Do we need to modify the work? We also need to teach him how to advocate for himself when he needs help. So we did like a 3-point system with him, where it's like a 1 was he doesn't need any help, a 2 was he needs help just to get started and he can do the rest, and a 3 was he needed help for most of the assignment, because he wouldn't initiate help to somebody. So we would just come up to him and say, tell me how much help you needed, and he could point to that. So that took a lot of tension off of him, being able to do that. We also did just a check-in system. So he would come he would switch classes, like I think 3 classes. So the teacher would check in with him, make sure he had all of his supplies. We had a little reward system that we made it real simple, easy for him to get access to things that he liked, but also a way to positively interact with him on catching him doing things that he liked. And so that really helped him start doing that, like just engaging in those positive interactions helped reduce how many times he started to escalate. And we really paid attention to those subtle signs of agitation of him putting his head into his hoodie. So those are a couple, like I said, if there's any questions, feel free to post it in here. Here's some more information that I have. I did a couple ebooks on some behaviors if you want more information. I'm going to go ahead and in here, I'm going to stop sharing. I'm going to put a survey in here. And if you would like to do the survey, I will send you a certificate of participation. It's not pre-approved for CEUs, but you can do that and I will send you a completion. I would love to have your feedback. And then I also send you guys access to the recording of this training. So you can watch it again if you want, share it with people. Any other questions? I'll stay on here for a few minutes if you do. If not, feel free to click on that Google Doc that I just posted. And thank you for joining me today.